All right. Let's open the meeting. This is the Lehigh County Authority Board of Directors meeting of October 11th, 2021. This meeting is being held in a hybrid fashion with some board members present in the conference room here in the offices and others available via Zoom internet application. So let's go through, do a roll call. First of all, the board members, followed by staff, and then any of the public that are also present.
Okay, starting with the board, roll call, Brian Noggle.
Here.
Scott Bieber. Richard Bonner.
Here.
Norma Cusick.
Here.
Ted Lyons. Kevin Baker. Linda Rosenfeld.
Here.
Jeff Morgan.
Here.
Amira Famili.
Present.
All right. 6 board members present, so we do have a quorum.
Okay.
We have our solicitor, Mike Gall from King Spry here.
Hello.
And then staff, in addition to myself, Lisa LaGrosse, we have Ed Klein, John Parsons, Chris Maughan, Chuck Volk, Susan Sampson, Andrew Moore, Phil DePoe, Lisa Miller, Todd Marion is on the call, along with some staff from the accounting staff, since it's a budget discussion. And we also have Jennifer Montero here for one of the topics on the agenda. She's live. For guests, we do have Jennifer McKenna, Brian Chamberlain here from the city of Allentown. Amanda Schumacher from Wharton Lawson is on the call, along with Herb Higginbotham and Mason Beck from HDR. And ready to go.
Okay, we are trying out a new audio system, so if anybody has any difficulties, please let us know as early as you can. We'll see what we can do about it. Should be an improvement. We did receive packages in the mail for board members for today's agenda and some electronic, and also electronically, and it's available. Today's agenda and documents are available on the internet. Let's begin with the review of the agenda and executive sessions.
Okay, thank you. There are no changes to today's agenda and no executive sessions planned.
Okay. Moving on to the approval of the minutes from the September 27th board meeting.
I make a motion, we approve the minutes as public.
Second.
Got Amira seconding that for you there, Linda, sorry. Motion made by Dick and seconded by Amir. Any questions by anybody? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Moving on to public comments. This is the opportunity for anybody from the public to share any thoughts they might have on items that are not on the agenda.
I have nothing, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Nothing for me either. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay. Now we move on to action and discussion items. The first item is under finance and administration. It is the third opportunity to review the preliminary 2022 budget review. It is a discussion. It is in the digital board package for pages 8 through 66.
All right. So this is our main topic for today. The 2022 budget is submitted to you in a near final form in the packet. So we're going to cover a lot of different topics today, but primarily focusing on the topics that are covered in the memo that was with the budget submission. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get into a presentation. We'll have some stopping points throughout the presentation where we can stop and discuss the various topics that we need to cover today. Yes.
Did we introduce Mike as being here?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Sorry.
We did. Okay, so today we are going to be covering a lot of different topics, as I mentioned, related to the budget. We'll provide a little bit of a summary of the budget as proposed. We'll spend some time talking about the staff additions that we propose related to our strategic plan. We will go through any changes by fund from the last presentation that we gave. So 2 weeks ago, we gave preliminary figures. There's some changes to the figures from that presentation, so we'll go through those. As part of that, we'll talk about suburban water rates and have a fairly detailed set of information to go over with you on the rates. And then end with some revenue and expense trends and our next steps. So a lot to cover today. Again, as I said, we'll have some break points throughout where we can stop and have discussion. We'll start with Ed on the budget summary.
Okay, so this is a summary of all of the funds, including a total LCA. Very similar to what you had seen in the last one. Breaks out net income, cash flows, debt service coverage ratio, and capital spending. And as you can see, for budget 2022, we are looking good with respect to being over or on the positive side of net income with 2 million, 1.8 and 2.2 million coming from the funds for a total of about 6.1 million. You can see that compared to the forecast, we are doing better, and as compared to 2021 budget, we are also doing better and doing significantly better than where we finished in 2020, where there was negative on the city and some positive on water and wastewater, but in total a negative 1.1. So it's almost like a $7 million swing in net income. Cash flows, same thing. We're positive in suburban water, wastewater, and the city division, and actually a total of $2.2 million, getting some big help from suburban wastewater at 4.4, and city is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5.4 million as well. You can see that across the board for water, wastewater, and city division. We are better than where we are forecasting 2021, and in total that $5.7 million is a little less than $5 million favorable, with budget is favorable to forecast. Same thing on the budget side. As you compare it to budget 2021, you get a swing in suburban water of actually more than $4 million. $2 million swing in positive side on the wastewater and city division, actually up about $800,000 positive variance. So 3.5 to 10.2 is pretty good. And as we compare it to 2020, we got a nice swing in suburban water of 4.1 million. Suburban wastewater, 3-point-some million positive swing in city division, almost $3.4 million. So in total, LCA was negative in 2020, and we're going to 10.2. So you got almost 11 million plus swing there. Debt service coverage ratios, you are 2.01 on water, 10.82 on wastewater, and 1.86 on city division. Obviously, they are all better than our internal threshold of 1.20. And as you compare to forecast, in suburban water, we are up. Suburban wastewater, we're down a little bit. City division, we're up. And as you compare it to 2021 budget, we're up on water, up on wastewater, and up on city division. And again, compared to where we were in 2020, all this is on the positive side, except suburban wastewater is down a little bit. So water's up 2.01 to 1.32, wastewater 10.82, and that was down a little bit from 11.95. City division at 1.86 is obviously better than 1.45 in 2020. So as we look at capital spending, we're talking about almost $20 million in total spending, of which suburban water is 5.5, wastewater is 2.9, and city division is 11.3. In terms of where that was compared to forecast, suburban water is up a little bit less than 2 million. Suburban wastewater is down a little bit. And on the city side, we're up almost 3 million. Compared to budget 2021, suburban water, suburban waste, well, suburban water is up, suburban wastewater again is down a little bit, and city division is up. So we budgeted to spend $17 million. Your 2022 budget is 19.6, and again, compared to 2020 actuals, we're up a little bit on suburban water. We're down significantly on suburban wastewater as we are projects are waiting pending approval of 537. City division 11.3 is up from the 4.2 that we experienced. So altogether, total spending in 2020 CapEx side is 17.6 versus 19.7. Okay, this is another version a different look at the summary. We'll take a walk down suburban water. So between all the revenues, we're coming in at 16.3. Our operating expenses are 10, and that is unchanged from the last time that we looked at this. So net revenues are 6.3. Our debt service is 3.1. So we're going to have a debt service coverage ratio of 2.01. As we look at the capital expenditures that we just talked about, essentially the funding for that $5.5 million is going to come from 2022 revenues of $2.4 million and borrowing of, I'll say, $3.1 million, and that'll leave us a project reserve of $2.042 million. In terms of the cash flows, we begin budget year 2022 with a forecasted amount of $3.9 million. The expected surplus is budgeted surplus is 2.8, of which we'll give 2.4 million to capital. So that'll leave $4.3 million in operating cash. That will be 155 days. Project reserves, as stated, will be 2.0, and other invested balances and restricted balances almost $8.9 million, meaning that between cash and investments in that fund, you will have $15.1 million versus 14.7 that we believe will come into the year with. On the wastewater side, $21.2 million, that is a little bit upward, and we'll get into what the changes were. Operating expenses just slightly up at 13.2, so we got almost $8 million available for debt service, and debt service is only $736,000, so that equates to a 10.82 debt service coverage ratio. On the funding side for the $2.9 million is pretty much all coming from revenue and operating reserves, and we should finish the year with $7.7 million still on the books in project reserves. So looking at total cash flow for wastewater, $3.8 million. Beginning balance, we're going to add $7.2 million in net cash flow, give up $2.9 million, as we said above, to capital, and that should leave us with $8.1 million of cash. That'll be 224 days. With the project reserve balance of 7.7, we'll have other invested balances and reserves of 6.7. So altogether in this fund, we'll have $22.5 million versus 18.2 coming into the year. And on the city division, we're talking about $51 million of total revenues with $22.3 million of expenses, leaving $28.8 million of money available for debt service. Debt service has restructured from the closing in September of 2020, would be $14.5 million. That should generate a debt service coverage ratio of 1.86. Capital expenditures said would be at 11.3. How that's being funded is $5.9 million of money that is coming from current cash flows and operating reserves. Another 4.6 coming from existing project reserves. And in this particular case, we have $1.2 million, which was related to the VFD project that got delayed over from this year. And according to the Penvest mechanics. So the total cash flow will be almost $9 million, beginning balance coming in with a surplus of 11.3. We'll give up $5.9 million to capital. That should give us operating cash of 14.4. And on the city side, that would be 208 days of cash on hand. We're not going to have much in the project reserve, just 170,000, but other restricted balances, and this is a fund where there's a lot of restricted cash, and et cetera. Actually, there's no investments any longer. This is all restricted cash. And that would give us almost $70 million worth of money in the fund against 64.5 coming in. In total, I'll just highlight it. If you look at LCA in total, we should come out with a debt service of 2.23 on almost $89 million of total revenues. Altogether on capital expenditures of 20 million almost, we're going to have 11.1 coming out of operating reserves and current revenues, 4.2 out of existing project reserves, and 4.3 out of new borrowing, with the new borrowing coming from Suburban Water and City Division. So as we come into the year with a cash balance of $16.7 million, and we're going to generate $21.3 million worth of cash surplus on the operating side and then give up 11.1 to capital, we should have a cash balance of $26.8 million. And obviously that's better than the 180 days we target. That's a 202. We'll have $9.9 million in reserves and almost 71 million sitting in the total pool of LCA cash with a total balance of 107.6 million versus 97 coming in. So it's getting better. Just looking at operation cash and investments. Again, when you add the investments to the picture that we have, obviously all of the days cash on hand gets better, and all of it's above 209. At one time when we talked about the city or the Suburban Water was at 155. Well, with some of the investments that are out there, now it's at 209. Suburban wastewater is up to 372. And again, there's no investments on the city side. So the 208 that we just saw before is 208. And LCA is at 269 days in total. As you look at total project cash plus investments, there's really only two funds. We got $1 million in Suburban Water and $1 million in Suburban Wastewater. So the project revenue, the total project reserves, including investments in subwater, would be $3 million. Suburban wastewater would be $8.7 million, $170,000 in the city, and $11.9 million in total.
That's the budget in a really high level view.
We have some statements that show some of the changes, and there was actually Suburban Water didn't change at all.
We're gonna go, and we'll go through those. Those are in here too. But we like to sort of summarize the whole budget in kind of one single sheet to give us a look at revenues, expenses, the CapEx, and the key benchmarks of debt service and cash on hand. So that's on page 6 of your booklet if you're interested in looking at that in more detail. So we're going to move into some discussion of the staffing that's included in the 2022 budget, and specifically the three positions we discussed at the last meeting that are focused on our strategic plan initiatives. And we're not at the point where we're ready to do a full review of our strategic plan because we're still working on it. But the board has been involved, stakeholders have been involved, our employees have been involved. It's been a pretty detailed and iterative process with feedback coming from a lot of different sources. And so at this point, we just want to share a couple of key things. And specifically based on the feedback we've received, we've learned and discussed what LCA should focus on in the future, and we've listed a few key things here. A continuous improvement, employee development, asset management are key things that came up repetitively through the process of receiving feedback, standardizing our approaches and processes, and then demonstrating the leadership in our industry and in the region, and a lot of other things. So the strategic plan is pretty comprehensive, but wanted to highlight these items as some of the key things we heard and talked quite a bit about as we're putting the strategies together. Some of the next steps that we have for our strategic plan include finalizing the implementation approach, which will be very detailed, and we're not going to present the task activity level type of detail to the board, but we need to put that together to make sure that we can implement and see positive change in the key critical areas that we will talk about. We need to develop some meaningful metrics, and that's kind of a process that we're working on right now. We will have more board discussion in October and November and do a presentation and request approval November, December timeframe. So, but at this point, we have a pretty solid framework in place, and the staff's been over it many, many times. The board has been through it a few times. Our consultants from Reftelis have been receiving feedback and incorporating that. Because we're at budget season, now's the time to incorporate any resources that we need to begin implementation of some of the key initiatives in 2022. So with that in mind, and trying to put all of the pieces of the strategic plan that are coming together into the framework of our budget, we identified three key staff resources that we believe are necessary to support the strategic priorities that are coming out of that planning process. The three that we talked about last time relate to employee development, process improvement, and asset management. These are three areas where our existing staff has some limited capacity to make progress, but we recognize them as being really critical for our long-term success. So we've included three positions, one in each of these areas, in the 2022 budget, and the cost of those three positions is reflected in the budget about $350,000. That's spread across the whole organization because it's an internal service expense. Brian, you look like you have a question. No, you're good? Okay, I'll make sure. So I'm going to go over the three positions in a little more detail, but this is also repetitive of what's in the memo. So I'm not going to read the bulleted list to you all. It's available on our website. You all have it, and it's on in this presentation. I just want to highlight a few things about each of them. So the first staff addition is in the area of employee development, and that really speaks to the strategic priority of employee engagement and safety, and we'll be supportive of all of the strategic plan because we need trained employees and leaders to bring all of our strategies forward. Some key things that this position will be responsible for are listed here. Just to sort of summarize it, I'd say we really would like to see this position develop our training program and standardize what we have and what we offer to our employees, and be very thoughtful about how we deliver training to our employees. So evaluating resources training resources to make sure they're cost effective and of a high quality, and really focused on our goals and achieving the licensing requirements at the same time. We also think that having an internal resource that can develop in-house training programs and actually deliver in-house training would be greatly beneficial and cost effective for our organization. Some key benefits or results that we would expect by adding this position to LCA's staff would be a standardization of our employee training program and really increasing accountability for training, both the quality of the training and the cost effectiveness of the program. And then some really good benefits related to job satisfaction, cross training, bench strength, opportunity for internal advancement. I think are really key things that we want to see come from this position. The next staff addition is in the area of process improvement. I think we had more discussion about this one at the last meeting, and the strategic priorities that we see this position supporting are really across the whole plan, but focus on operational excellence, customer engagement and support, financial stewardship, and employee engagement and safety. Essentially, what we would expect this position to be responsible for is to evaluate and prioritize process improvement opportunities, of which there are many, through the whole organization, and work across the whole organization, all departments, to design and implement process improvements. We believe there's a lot of opportunity for LCA to increase our use of industry best practices and use tools, standardized tools for process improvement to identify and eliminate waste or inefficiencies. Through that process, we would expect that this position could quantify the cost savings and quality improvements that we're achieving along the way. Listed just a few examples of the kinds of opportunities that we've identified. We've talked about some of these over time with the board. Manual complex processes kind of across the board. A couple key opportunities relate to our time reporting and our payroll system. Also our customer service system or process, very paper-based manual process. Our sewer signatory billing process also has a lot of opportunity for improvement across the organization, and our regulatory and operational reporting processes. Oftentimes we have people who are doing the same kind of reporting but different ways, and trying to standardize and remove the duplication of effort in that area. And again, I think I mentioned this last time, we have a list of about 100 other small and large process improvement opportunities that we'd like to move forward on with some help. Some key benefits we would expect from this position. Efficiency is the key thing. We believe that we can quantify that for each opportunity that's been identified. And that will result in some opportunity to either reduce or repurpose some headcount, especially where we're eliminating some of those manual administrative processes to allow some higher level work to be done if we can eliminate some of the burden of those items. I think it's really important that we focus also on reducing our risk for institutional knowledge loss. All these manual processes require someone to know what to do and when and how to do it, and creating some automation will really help with that, and several other opportunities there. The last one is related to asset management, and this is a critical need for LCA. I think we can agree that operational excellence and system capacity and reliability, these are important areas for us, and having a more standardized asset management approach would be extremely helpful and necessary for us to move forward on those areas. So an asset management person or position would be responsible for developing that approach, standardizing what data we collect, developing preventative and also predictive maintenance strategies, and focusing on developing strategies to optimize our life cycle costs for our assets. Over time, this position, we believe, will have broad benefits for the organization, including decreasing system failures and improving our response to those system failures, reducing the risk of failure. Also increasing generally our organizational capacity for, say, data-driven decision-making, but really focusing on how we make decisions on capital and operational priorities. Improving customer service and increasing the accuracy of our capital planning and operational expense forecasting. So a lot covered in those slides, a lot of thoughts, I think, and important concepts we want to achieve by adding these 3 positions to the budget. But thought I'd stop here and discussion, questions, thoughts on including these 3 in our budget.
Board members, any questions for Lisa?
Since everyone's quiet, I'm going to start as usual.
Counting on you.
Yes, I know. The rookie, the younger one. Lisa, on the asset management, I think it's a great idea because every organizations that have asset-driven business has to have an asset manager, right? Could you elaborate? 2 things is essential for me. Organizational-wise, who does that asset manager report to? And what kind of capability you're looking for? Because that's really critical. I just want to see your thought process, where you're going with that.
Well, those are questions that we actually don't have answers for today. The job description, like developing the job description, the qualifications, the reporting structure is kind of the step that we would take before we commit to recruiting and filling the position. So don't have that fully worked out at this point, who would report to, and what the qualifications would be. But we are expecting it would be a PE type person and an engineer with experience in asset management in water industry. Asset management leadership is typically an engineering type function. And so part of the struggle that we have now is the organization structure related to asset management is dispersed. And so we have some functions that are being done within the IT group, some functions that are being done within the operations group. Planning has a lot of Phil's work, and then Chuck's work in capital works. And so those are 4 separate departments, and then Ed's work in finance. So trying to figure out where it fits in the organization to provide leadership for a cross-organizational function. We still have some internal staff discussions to have about that.
For the process improvement, that's one of my the hot topics that I would love to talk about, in that, whenever you have process improvement, I think if you look at the staff, you bring in about $120,000 cost for that individual, right? You have to have a plan to eliminating $120,000 minimum cost to break even for that individual coming in. Otherwise, bringing a person for the efficiency without having, you have a list of projects, right? So you have last week or the 2 weeks before we talked, there are people who have gone to prioritization of this project. And those hanging fruits that are going to yield, a couple $100,000 saving, right? What I don't see here right? Because normally when people come for the process improvement, asking for resources, they said, if we add $120,000 cost, we can eliminate $240,000 cost, or minimum I can cut $120,000. I don't see that, and it is very difficult to approve without, is it two-way equation? I just see one way, I don't see the other way.
We don't have the other side of that equation. We could certainly work on that, but we don't have the resource staffing available to go through the 100 opportunities to try to quantify each of them and what the savings will be. We could certainly work on that before we decide to fill the position, but we don't have that legwork done at this moment.
There's a comment on, we talked before about the first staff position and now this staff position. You should also be looking at not just fitting these individuals into the existing organization, but does the organization need change so that it can be more effective, efficient, and more streamlined? We're talking about this position and kinds of the second position. You have the direct savings that are possible. You also have the indirect savings,
Correct.
which are difficult to quantify. And when you make it efficient for one person, you might also make it efficient for other people. So you have a carry-on effect to other people. So if you help somebody do things quicker, more efficient, they can then do other things. And how do you quantify that other thing that they also would do? So there's a lot to this. I understand that, and it takes a lot of thought. I understand where Mir's coming from, trying to say, hey, we need to tell our customers that if we're spending an additional $120,000, they're going to benefit much more than $120,000 in savings. It's just a question of how do you quantify that? There's some direct costs, and I wouldn't look for a direct $120,000 savings. You look for $120,000. You look for $120,000 plus in direct and indirects efficiency. So I don't even know how you quantify that. Maybe you have some ideas on how to better quantify that, but it's really tough to put a package together for this individual. What are all the direct and indirect savings you're going to realize from that?
You're absolutely correct, Brian. You always have tangible and intangible saving, right? But the list, you always always all the companies have 100 lists, right? I remember, we said we spent about $1 million for a saving for a project, and the project saving was $20,000. Was it worth to spend $1 million to get 20,000 saving? No. So that's the reason it's essential that at least we have an idea. They said if we bring these processes in place, right, this person in place, right, we can streamline some of the work and then, reduce the work, but at the same time, maybe we have 2 or 3 FTE reduction in resources because we don't need everybody doing this manual work. But without quantification of where we're going to project they are, I do recognize the list is big, but I think the hanging fruit that is pretty obvious, one we look at it can say, these are the 3 projects we're going to hire the person for. And that is my thought process, right? And the other one is, this is a nonprofit organization. I think one time we brought a cost efficiency for some remote metering, I forgot what it was, right? And Kevin asked the questions that, okay, you're adding $1 million cost. So where is the cost saving? And that project was pulled away and I never heard from it and what happened to it. So is there culture within the nonprofit organization that, it's a tough thing. I lost a lot of sleep that through this efficiency, you have to let people go. Is that part of the culture that we're going to have or not? So I just want to make sure that, we are honest to ourselves and to the ratepayer that, what decision we're making here.
I understand what you're saying, and I think, it's always difficult in the context of a budget where we're looking ahead at things we want to do and don't have all the answers for at the time that we're putting the budget together. I think where I would recommend anyway that we would go is that some of the questions that you're asking are important to be answered. But if we don't have it at the time when we're trying to pass the budget, we can answer them when we're ready to fill the position and kind of move forward on that basis. We just don't have all the answers today to show you at a very specific level of detail what all the efficiencies are going to be. We kind of highlighted some of them, gave you some examples of the things, but as far as truly quantifying, in a dollar for dollar kind of standpoint, we just don't have that.
Just something just popped to mind. I don't know if it makes sense or not. Does it make sense that for us, for the first year, to allocate a portion of that money to a consultant from outside, which has totally non-biased view, have expertise on CI, to come and look at 3 or 4 projects that you have identified, your team, as the low-hanging fruit, which will have the most impact to the operational and employee workload. And they come and say at the assessment, yes, these are things it can be done and can achieve this amount of saving. So when we hire a person, we can hit the road and go in, quickly. I'm just thinking of how to cover, if you hire a full-time person, then that full-time person is here, as a full-time person for a long time, right? So I'm trying to see how we kickstart this saving project with understanding where are the potential saving. So when we hire a person, that person can, come in and start impacting our return on the investment of that individual. I don't know, just a thought process.
Any other board comments, thoughts, suggestions? Can you go back to the visual of everybody that's here? Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, this is Jeff. I have a question. So if we would just simply put a line item in the budget for this person for next year, is that money, is this position paid for within like the current revenues we have? Is there going to be an increase? And if for some reason we put the money in the budget and we don't hire that person, that money would be used for something else. I mean, I think that's the way to go at this point. And then, Lisa could work to get some more details to answer some of Amir's points. But that seems to me like the most reasonable thing to do. But I just didn't know how we're paying for these additional positions.
so these 3 positions are all included in the budget figures that we presented to you. So, and they're in the payroll personnel cost categories. So if we would not fill the position, that would just be a reduction in what we spend in that line item. And, would be a favorable variance from a cost perspective, from an internal perspective of being able to move forward on all the things that we have identified. It's, would be difficult to move forward without the positions added.
Yeah, speaking maybe from a different angle, my concern has been since I've been here is we have identified a lot of things that need to be done to make this business better. She's touched base on some of them. The manual time entry, the whole process being manual, the inability to use I'll call it all of what you would say is an ERP, because we just don't have the legacy knowledge on it. The thing that struck me is we have a lot of things which they're part of, and many more. I mean, I've seen the list of 100 items. And quite frankly, I haven't run across anything on that list that I would say shouldn't be done. But I can tell you without hesitation, if I have 10, 15 of them, I'm not getting into them if I don't get some help along the way. And I envisioned the process improvement person to be somewhat of a facilitator that could get a lot of, I'll call it cross-functional members on board with the object, to also break some of the IT barriers that we face. And that would, I think, be part of what we're looking for in this person, is to actually help us get across the functional lines into the IT side of the business. I mean, quite frankly, I could say Mark has done a great job doing that. We're doing a number of projects, looking at project accounting modules that are different than what we do, because we need to get better forecasting, et cetera. One of the neat things is this person has the ability to reach out to various technical experts that the rest of the group can't do. And so I look at this as a key ingredient to actually checking off some of the boxes. And we have not done what I would say is taken the 200 projects, which include some of the strategic initiatives, and say, well, this one's going to save us $10,000. No, we haven't done that. But I haven't seen any project that I would look at and say, wow, if we could get that to happen, there's not some savings there. It's just that we can't check them off sometimes. And that becomes somewhat frustrating to the rest of the business, that we can't check some of these things off. So I'm really hoping this position would be something that could be a combination facilitator, I'll call it IT barrier breaker, and somebody that can take some, I'll call it loose members and harness their skills and abilities. And I think there's savings in it, but I'll admit that we just didn't sit down and do all that.
I agree with 200%. There is just, I cannot, argue with what you comment. My only question has been, can a team spend a week and look at, these are the low-hanging fruit. We are not asking for the, accuracy, but there is a potential $50,000 savings, $60,000 saving. If you hire this person, this is the three things. So we know a year from now, we'll be sitting here, hopefully we'll be asking for another, CI person to improve our efficiency. We said, you know what, the one person you guys give it to us, we were able to return that investment. That's all I'm asking for. This is not for accuracy. This is, can you condense that list of 100 to 3 or 4 with some 50 plus or minus % accuracy on the return on the investment?
And I think that we can do that. We just haven't done it.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. I think that we can do it. Like I mentioned, I think in the memo about the payroll or time recording piece, and we've estimated we have up to 4 full-time equivalents working on time entry. That's a lot of time. So, reducing the workload for those 4 people in half, and either and repurposing their time into some more value-added stuff. We can certainly go through and do that analysis. We just haven't done it. And for purposes of the budget, we want to get the positions in so that we have the capacity to know that we can fill those positions and do that homework.
Even if you haven't analyzed the cost savings that would come from the hiring of these people, you must have a strong sense that you need them.
Absolutely.
And that they're going to be worth what we're going to pay them.
Sure. Yeah, I think where Ed was going with some of his comments too is the things that hold us back from achieving a lot of different things that the board is asking for in terms of reporting on metrics or doing the project cost accounting, the forecasting, all that stuff. There's a lot that holds us back because we have these manual outdated processes. So, the staff has a certain level of frustration in not being able to get through those and deliver higher quality deliverable to you, and having some help in removing those administrative challenges.
So a lot of these challenges are manual challenges, things that are done manually right now, and you want to transform them into IT processes.
Yeah, or there's, 6 people who have some input into a process, and it's done all in Excel, you know, and then transferred into the financial system in some way. It's like, you know, getting those 6 people together to figure out what steps could be eliminated and make the process easier so that we have, you know, more time to do other things.
Do you think it would be helpful for the board to see this list of so-called these 100 items or something?
I think I'd probably rather find the top 3 to 5 things that will have impact and give you a better sense of those, because a list of 100 things is a lot, even for us who work here full time, to get through. But we can put
I just
some,
thought it would give me an idea
yeah,
of what
the
exactly
scope of things, sure.
trying to achieve.
But it runs across the whole gamut of HR practices, financial practices, IT implementation, operational reporting, a strong data management component, which is why we would see this position living within the technology world of LCA. And with Chris's leadership, I feel confident we'll get a lot of automation and technology enhancement through this work.
How much will it cost to get a consultant in here, as the mayor suggested?
I don't know. I don't know if I would agree with that recommendation personally. I think that we know enough about what the improvements are that we could give you that plus or minus 50% accuracy type of what you're looking for, if we would spend the time to do that. Just in the middle of budget season, we haven't done that.
I have no objection for adding that person. I mean, my vote is yes to add that person, so I just want to make that clear. My only intent is that, you know, since we have a budget responsibility to the ratepayer, right? And we are bringing that person because we want to cut, you know, inefficiency. That we have a clear idea where that person is going to focus on. And a year from now, have we achieved that goal that we set up for ourselves or not? I do recognize by the time we bring that person on board, let him train them, identify the project. It's 6 months, right? So so 6 months from now, that person would be in place to start working on their real project. So I'm not idealistic that, you know, knowing that these things are going to start hitting from, you know, January 1st. But at least we have to have a trend to see that, yes, this person that we brought with $120,000 cost is paying off. And, you know, Ed can see that in his bottom line, in his net operating income.
Any other board comments? I think, just for my comment, that as board members, we're approving a dollar amount for additional personnel, $360,000 all in. And we have to have a sense that that's going to get a return on our investment for the customers. But that's really the last time we get to approve. We don't get to approve the individual hires and the scope of work and that stuff. So we're you know, placing the confidence in management to take that $360,000 and make the most money out of it as we possibly can for the return of that.
That's correct.
I kind of do like the idea of, it's been a long time since we really did an organizational review. And what I'm hearing is that there are lots of opportunities, and we're also not so sure where these positions would fit in. So I would like the staff to really think about, you know, moving forward, is there something we should be doing from a consulting standpoint, or even internal if you can do that, but just to look at the organizational structure and to decide, you know, do we have the right structure to be as efficient as possible, with the right people, and really go through that again. I know we did that a long time ago.
We do it regularly.
You do it.
Right. So, you know, and we're working on some reorganization right now within our operations department to address some succession planning and other organizational needs. So it is something that we do on a regular basis. The only position that we're still, that we have some open questions about is asset management, because it is so cross-organizational and how that fits within the structure that we have today. So we do have some work to do on that, but as far as the overall staff organization structure, that's an ongoing discussion that we have within our team meetings. So I'm happy to go through that with the board if you'd like, but that is something that we do.
Every once in a while, it's good to change things up.
Which, and we do, yeah.
Okay, any other board comments on that section of the presentation?
That's part one.
Part two, okay, but just now we have personnel, so
Yeah.
go ahead. Part,
Okay.
whatever, next part.
All right, let's see, get back to it. Thank you for that good discussion, I appreciate it. Okay, so now we're going to go into the proposed budget, and as Ed mentioned, we have some changes from the last presentation that you saw, not too many, but we'll go through those, and we'll start with suburban water so we can dive right into the suburban water rate discussion, which is important that we have today. Ed.
So if you look at the changes and you look at the rightmost column, you'll see zeros. Essentially, we are still in the budget currently has 24% revenue increase required. However, we want to break that up, and that'll be part of the discussion. Debt service coverage is 2.01, as we talked about before. The capital spending of 5.5 is being funded from new borrowing. So yes, we do have to borrow even under the 24% scenario, and some current reserves. And at the end of the day, we should have 155 days cash on hand without investments. And the project reserve balance will be 2.0. Other stuff will be 8.9. So this fund will have 15.1 million against 14.7, and that essentially means your cash flow is $402,000 on the positive side, and that's unchanged from the last discussion. Kind of the same thing. You can see the cash flow, $402,000. The $16.3 million of operating revenue, 10 million of expenses leaves. We'll get some other non-operating stations like interest income, not at a very high rate. So $6.3 million available for debt service. Once we consider debt service and some working capital changes, we're left with 2.8. And the only way we'll be able to pay for capital is borrowing 3.1 million against 5.5. Key metrics: operating ratio will be 1.25, debt service 2.01, capital coverage 0.57, that's without borrowing, and then just total cash days on hand will be 229, with $2.5 million of unrestricted investment balances. And again, not any different than what we talked about last meeting.
Okay, so we're gonna pause now that you've seen the suburban water numbers and go into the rate discussion. And this is the second big topic that we need to cover today. So what's driving the need for additional revenue in the suburban water division really focus on two areas. The first is the water purchase cost from Allentown. So the water that we're purchasing from Allentown is going to cost about $754,000 more in 2022. That's a significant increase from last year. That's driven partly because we are taking a little bit more water than we had in the past. In the past, we were taking 7 million gallons per day. We're ratcheting that up closer to 8 million gallons per day in 2022. On the cost side, however, the rate side, part of the agreement that we have with Allentown includes representative or proportionate cost sharing for both operations and capital. And in 2021, we were able to increase the pay-as-you-go capital that we're doing at the water filtration plant as a result of having some financial relief within our settlement agreement with Allentown. So as the capital resumes at the level that we think is appropriate for that facility, that is reflected in the rate. So that's one of the main drivers for the large increase in 2022. And then as we look out into the future, we've done some forecasting of what the cost will be over the next 5 or 10 years, and we see that that cost stabilizes. We will see some increases because of O&M cost increases. And then also in 2024, you can see on the chart at the bottom, we see another sizable increase, about 12% increase as some of the major capital projects start to kick in, and we pay for those on a debt service basis. So for example, the filter project or the VFD project will pay a proportionate amount of the debt service for that Penvest loan, and that'll kick in probably in 2023 to 2024. Is there a question? Just background noise. So the water purchase cost is a driver for the expense, but really a more significant driver relates to how we're thinking about capital improvements. And overall, we talked about this the last time, the shift in our project mix to more maintenance related or what we call repair and replacement projects. And while it's acceptable and allowable for us to borrow for repair and replacement projects, really pay as you go is a preferred method for those because they become annual recurring expenses. For example, the water main replacements, which makes up very large portion of our capital budget for 2022. We really should be doing annual main replacement projects at this level or higher as our system ages. So what I'm showing on the chart is our project mix for 2022, and essentially in 2 different buckets. One for the repair and replacement category, which is the vast majority, and then the top category for new facilities or studies. Those are projects that are more once and done type projects or could result in new facilities being constructed for supply or capacity type work. So those projects, if they materialize from the studies, would be more appropriate for future borrowing if you're developing additional capacity for the system.
Question on depreciation, or if you move something into repair and replace, like the Arcadia water tank replacement, the old tank was depreciated over time, right?
Correct.
And now you're going to add new depreciation schedule for the new tank? Or?
Essentially, if you're going to do a replacement, you would take the old tank out of service.
Right.
And then put the new one in and then depreciate that over a longer time frame. So you would eliminate depreciation of one that exists and the cost. Then you would just put the new cost and depreciate that over, 30 years.
So my question really becomes depreciation on repair and replacement projects. Is that acceptable practices?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, as long as you're doing that, as long as you're putting it on as an asset and adjusting the books for the assets taken away, yes.
So as we look at 2022 specifically, this is a chart or table that Ed had reviewed last time that essentially just walks us through how we got to the 24% revenue increase requirement. And just sort of walking through the top, we look at our operational expenses. And Ed, you'll do a better job. Go ahead.
Starting with, I'll call it the cash-based operating expenses of 10.064. You're getting non-operating revenues, which is some tapping fees, some other system charges, some developer revenue. Essentially, that's going to still be on the books, so you can take that out of user charges. So that's minus 50,000 plus. Other system and connection revenue is almost $1 million coming out of the picture, same thing. So then you're putting back a requirement for, well, if debt service is 3,125,490, you got to pay for that. New debt is really an interest expense on whatever we're borrowing, and we said we were going to borrow 307 $3,075,000. So you got to add that back into the picture too. The indenture requires a 20% coverage to get to 1.20. So you're going to add $644,000 against all of that debt service. And then the pay-go requirement that we wanted to get to of 2.4 million, it gets you $15.3 million worth of what you would need for user charge requirement. And that compares to the 12.4, or that's a 23.93 or /24% rounded increase. It was just, I wanted to do it this way to show the real requirements and not try to work back from cash flows. We really wanted to say, this is what I should be getting.
So, thank you, Ed. Stated a slightly different way, the revenue increase that we're targeting is about $3 million. And that's a 24% increase over 2021. Some of the discussion that we need to have and get direction from the board on it relates to the capital, because that's the largest portion of the revenue requirement is the $2.4 million we want to put into capital directly from revenues. So, and again, that we'll continue to have to borrow for all of the CapEx. The information that we're sharing assumes a 2% sales growth in 2022, which is about average that we've been experiencing over the last couple 5 years. So we have two options to talk about today. Option one is what we talked about last time, which is putting the full rate impact into 2022. That's what the numbers show in this budget proposal. And that will result in some lower increases in the future. However, because borrowing is still an option for those projects, we wanted to at least explore more of a phased-in approach, and that's our option two. So if we wanted to continue to borrow more in the next 5 years, we could do that with a different rate approach. And we'll look at what that looks like right now. So Ed put together a 10-year forecast of expenses and borrowing and rate increases for both of the options. Ed, would you like to go through these?
Yes, essentially all I'm doing is saying that in 2023, I'm going to need to get another $3.8 million worth of borrowing to cover $6.8 million worth of intended CAPEX. And all of the CAPEX for 2003, 4, 5, and 6 is really coming, as 27 too, is coming from the capital plan that was out there. Essentially what it means is, in operating expenses, I really just took outside of the water purchase increase, a normal 3% increase in whatever, inflationary, et cetera, and then added to it the water purchase increase that we had seen just on the table before. So it's kind of a operating expense at a normal rate, and then add the new water purchase agreements, because we didn't want to overlook that when we were looking at it this time, which we kind of did when I did the capital plan. So essentially, it says at the end of 2023, you pretty much got the last required borrowing in. You'll have a net fund cash flow of $692,000. More importantly, you would need to do a rate increase of 5.5%. And following along that line, you would, as you get into 2024, 25, 26, and 27, for that block of time, you were going to need to get 5.5% user rate increases to get the revenue you need to pay for the capital. And then as you get through 2029, 30, 31, and 32, you're talking about not having to have any increase required, because your rates are going to be at a level that you're going to cover your capital expenditure 100% anyway. And really, this is just, again, as you see, as you get to 2028, we're saying that now the intent is to not borrow again. but along the way, we didn't have to after 2023. So
I think what this model also shows, or this forecast shows, with having 0% rate increases predicted out in the second 5 years of the 10-year forecast, is really that's our cushion, or our it reflects that there is some borrowing capacity if there were to be some larger projects that would come in. So if we had a larger project come in the 2028 timeframe, we would have some rate capacity to accommodate some additional debt service if we had some additional CapEx come in. Option 2, which is the phased-in approach, same look at it, but with different numbers. Go ahead.
yeah, and actually, the key numbers here are already highlighted. You're now going to borrow $5.7 million, and that's up a bit from what we said we would need on option 1. In 2024, you're going to need to borrow a little bit more than $3 million. And then in 2025, 1.4, and in 2026, $2.6 million. So you're borrowing for 4 of the 5-year window that we're talking about, and to accommodate the debt service that's going to arise from that. Now your user charge increase is going to be 7.7777 for the 5-year window, and then can drop to 2.5 for the remaining 5 years, which is a little bit higher than the 0 that we said we would be able to get away with. And obviously the 7% in the first 5 years is higher than 5.5% because of the amount of borrowing that you're taking on in the additional debt service.
One thing I forgot to mention, Ed, is that the phased-in approach assumes a 7% increase in 2022 as well.
Yes.
I didn't mention that, but that's
yes.
essentially what the option is.
If we borrowed more than what we're setting out in the budget, yes, we get that phased-in increase is 7%.
What was the increase in the other phase, the option 1, what was the 2023 user charge 5? Okay. I guess I'm not understanding, what's option 1, we're borrowing 3.7, that's the proceeds. And option 2, we're doing a lot more borrowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only almost $2 million more in 2023, but another $7 million across.
Why are we doing all that borrowing that we're not doing under phase 1?
Would be to avoid the 24% upfront increase.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
I have a summary which might help. Put this summary together. Go ahead.
Okay, so this, what you're not showing here is the 24% increase in
Right.
This is-
2022.
Yeah, this is
So
the
you're starting
summary.
at 23 on beyond that,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, because look at that, what else are you gonna do? With that amount of money, it's like,
Yeah, I understand, yes, and I know what you're saying, but I understand that the phased-in approach, but 2022 has changed from what we budgeted. We didn't show that year in there, but that's only 7% increase, not the 24% increase. So as the budget is now, it's 24, and then rolled out under option 1, where you only have 1 year of borrowing, and then option 2 is a 7% increase in 2022, followed by some more 7% increases that drop to 2.5.
So let me just go through the summary a little bit. Hopefully that helps. Maybe we should have had a 2022 column in there. That would have helped a little bit. But this is the summary, which hopefully will capture it a little more succinctly. Option 1 is the heavy rate impact in 2022. And we're saying that's a 22% rate impact because we're accounting for 2% growth. Option 2 is a 7% rate impact in 2022. Okay. Now, are you good now?
much more clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we wanted to show the cash flows so you could see what there's, the details behind these numbers. But essentially what the 2 options do, on the option 1, we have the larger rate increase, which reduces our need to borrow. in the future. And that in turn reduces the rate impact in the future. So the cumulative rate impact from 2022 to 2032 is 49.5%, which is, I mean, none of these are really terrible over a 10-year time, 11-year time frame. But if we compare that to the phased-in approach where we're borrowing more, we're borrowing $12.7 million instead of $3.8 million. The impact of that additional borrowing is that the cumulative rate impact is higher at 54.5%. And all of that is kind of targeted the way that Ed did it to achieve the same result of having meeting the 180 days cash balance and achieving the full $51 million of CapEx during that same time frame. So how do we achieve the operating cash that we need and the CapEx that we need is different between option 1 and option 2. And overall, you can see the impact of the annual debt service payment going from $3.4 million up to almost $4 million. And then our project reserve balance going down. And this is a 2032 number. So in 2032, we'd expect a project reserve balance of $4.6 million, or if we phase it in and do more borrowing, then our project reserve balance goes down to $1.2 million. We're still needing debt service coverage, but wanted to show these to you side by side so you can get a picture of overall performance under the two options.
I heard, the 22% increase that we're possibly gonna have next year translates to how much in dollar figures of an increase in quarterly billing? I think it was in one of our reports.
Yeah, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. I wanted to do this first on the impact to LCA's financials, and then we'll look at the actual impact on the rates and the customers. So, so clearly option 1 from a pure LCA financial performance standpoint is better. For the customer, that may not be the case, and I think that's an important consideration.
Well, long term, it is better. Because
Long term, it is better.
We'll have $4.6 million in bank to cover anything in the future versus current points.
Right. It's a matter of our tolerance for those kinds of increases in a single
Their
year.
tolerance for those things.
Some of us are customers too. So going into the water rate itself, there are a couple design elements in our rate structure that I wanted to share. The fixed charge captures our fixed expenses and just kind of overall for a residential customer or a smaller customer, a higher percentage of your bill is in the fixed charge. For the larger users, a higher percentage of their bill is in the volume charge, or they're paying per 1,000 gallons on a volume charge. We do still have a declining block rate because our rate study shows how our variable expenses flow through to different customer classes based on the volumes that they use. In putting a rate proposal together, get to distribute the expense to all users a little bit differently for the fixed versus the volume charge. So I'll get into what that looks like. The proposed rates that I'm going to show you are based on the 2022 proposed budget, which includes the big increase, the option 1 increase. Okay. So getting into the fixed charge, what's shown on the slide now includes the current charge that customers pay per quarter or per month based on meter size, and then what the proposed charge would be to meet the revenue targets. So for an average residential customer, they have a 5/8 by 3/4 inch meter. Their proposed new fixed charge would be $31.30 per quarter. I think I've shared some of this.
It's per quarter.
Per quarter, yeah. So just to give you some comparison on the fixed charge, we have some examples of some of the regional water utilities that we look at in terms of rate comparisons. This is just for the fixed charge. Our current fixed charge is $20.05 per quarter for a residential customer, and that is almost the lowest in the region. Borough of Emmaus has a lower charge than us at this point. If we use the proposed fixed charge of $31.30 per quarter, that puts us more in the middle of the pack. So kind of the middle of the pack of between $25 and $40 is pretty normal. I have also highlighted in here the American Water Works Association published a rate study for 2021, which I received a few weeks ago, pouring through it. The national average for residential fixed charge is $40.41 per quarter. So we're at $31, we're right in the mix with the region and the national average. The volume charge, again, this is the declining block rate that we have. And over time, we have been trying to close that gap a little bit with the declining block rate. And the proposed charge for 2022 shows the volume rate going from $2.76 per 1,000 gallons up to $3.26, so a 50-cent increase per 1,000 gallons. And then it flows through to the rest of the different blocks. So to your question, Scott, the rate impact for the rate structure I just reviewed, for the average residential customer, the impact of that increase is $18.75 per quarter, or about $75 per year.
Sure.
Okay. The large commercial and industrial customers, the impact it varies depending on usage. And it varies for the residential customer as well, just not as widely. So we have some industrial customers that use an awful lot of water, and the rate impact for some of them will be in the six-figure category, which is a lot. So the total impact is between 18 and 30% depending on usage and how the usage flows through the rate blocks.
What's the average percentage rate for the residential customer on here? I mean, the fixed rate charge is up about 50% from 20 to 30.
Right.
And then the user thing went up about 30-some%.
The user rate went up about 18%. Yeah, so depending on how much water a customer uses,
So on
rate
average,
impacts.
based on the average water usage, the residential customer is going to probably see somewhere around what, a 30% increase? 35?
Probably closer to the 24. The 24% increase.
Well, for you, okay. Yeah, I have to, okay. Yeah, the volume component is a much larger component than the fixed rate component, right?
For a residential customer, the fixed rate is actually probably a larger component of their bill.
Well, the fixed rate's going up 50%.
Right.
So how can you end up with only an average 24% increase for a residential customer?
It'll depend on how much water they use. So the average water use is about 15,000 gallons per quarter. That's what this is based on. So $75 per year. It might be closer to a 30% increase overall, but it's going to be more of an increase for customers who use less water. It'll be less of an increase for people who use more water. So, but most of them will fit within the range of 18 to 30%, depending on the usage. But want to share with you that because of the magnitude of this increase, it's the largest increase that we've done for the suburban water division. We did notify the large industrial users of the proposed rate structure here last week, so that they would have time to look at it, and it's budget season for them too. And if they're facing a six-figure increase, certainly they would want to know that sooner rather than later. We did receive some feedback not a lot, but some feedback from those industrial customers saying that a phased approach would be preferred. And I think that's fair feedback for us to consider. But nothing real specific in terms of a comment to share with the board, just that general feedback that a phased approach would be preferred over this large increase.
So could you just go back to the chart just before this? It shows the water charge.
These are in the memo as well that you have on your packet. Okay. So I know the board always likes to know how our rates compare across the region. And this is an updated graph from one that I've shared with you in the past, showing 24 communities across the Lehigh Valley and an average annual residential water and sewer bill that's based on 5,000 gallons per month or 15,000 gallons per quarter. And what you'll see is and this includes the proposed rates that I just reviewed with you. So the three yellow bars for Lower Macungie, Upper Milford, and Upper Macungie Township, those represent kind of the core of our suburban water division service area. And so the average water and sewer bill for residential would be a little over $600, close to $700 per year. And then just a couple bars over, we have the City of Allentown division, and these are the rates for 2022 that are captured within the lease agreement. So we haven't presented them to you. We'll present them to you when we do the rate approval, but those are by formula how the rates work in Allentown. And you can see where if you live in Allentown, customer there would pay about $800 per year for water and sewer combined. And then all the other communities in the Lehigh Valley are listed here, and some other areas that are highlighted. We do have some systems where LCA owns and operates some small sewer systems, which are very expensive to manage for such a small customer base. And so that's what's driving the higher rates there. And then of course your Aqua America and Pennsylvania American rates, which are double or more than what our current rates are.
It'd be interesting to see that chart with the water component and the sewer component.
We can do that.
Double the bar, each bar.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. It's very interesting to see the mix of the water and the sewer.
Listen,
Yes.
I've lost sight of the development that we deal with in Northampton. Does that appear in any of this stuff?
What do you mean?
Didn't we take over a water company in Northampton County? I never see that listed as an item in here. Is that merged in with other stuff?
They do not have public sewer. They only have water, so they're not on this list because they only have water. Yeah. But they are on this rate structure that we're talking about. That's the Clearview Farm Estates division in Moore Township. So option 2, without going into all the rate charts again, as far as the fixed charge and the volume charge, just provide a summary here showing if we were going to do option 2, which is the phased in approach, the 2022 rates would be, that I went through on option 1 would of course be reduced proportionately to achieve a 7% increase instead of 22%. Average residential impact would be about $22 per year. Again, the commercial industrial customers will vary depending on usage, the impact, but on average, the impact would be between 5 and 9%, depending on customer usage. So obviously a little easier for customers to manage if we wanted to take that approach. So the key point of all of this is to get us to a point where we can have some discussion and get some direction on where we should go with the rate proposal, which impacts the budget and the final budget that we'll present in 2 weeks. Questions, just some questions I think we need to grapple with. Should the repair and replacement type capital be funded through the user rates? And I listed there or depreciation as kind of a proxy for that. Is a larger upfront increase appropriate to achieve the long-term stability that we're looking for? Is $75 per year too much for an average residential customer? What about the large users who face a 6-figure increase in their water costs? All right, do we have concerns about that? Or is a phase-in approach more acceptable with higher understanding we have to do higher borrowing over time for those kinds of projects?
Well, I clearly think $75 per year, which works out to about 21 cents a day, is not too much of an increase to ask for an average residential customer. Larger users I think they can swallow this increase. We have very good water.
That we do.
What would suffer if we split the 22% into 11 and then started something else like that? Just to make the jump more palatable for large users. That handcuff you in any way?
Well, I'm just thinking about what it would do. And then, so if you went 11 instead of 24, you would essentially probably have to borrow some of the capital 2024 and 2025. Not sure how much beyond that. And certainly the rate increase would be maybe slightly larger than the 7.5% or the 7% that we had in there. Just simply because you're adding the debt service in. So, but I would have to run the numbers. I mean, I'm just trying to conceptually say a couple more years of borrowing would be required. The rate would not be 7, it would be a little bit higher. What that is exactly, I would have to run it.
What's the bet on interest rates? Are we better off borrowing now or after the Fed gets a new idea?
No, that's a valid question. And quite frankly, one of the reasons why I was able to stomach borrowing in 2022 and 2023 is given that interest rates, although they want to say it's 2.5%, over a period of time. It's at 5.3 and it's gone up to 5.5. So economically, you're going to pay back money of less value. So, I mean, if you're going to be in a situation where you're taking on debt, that would be the time to do it. Now, I can't answer what debt would be like if we did borrowing on a yearly basis, what it would be like in 2024 and 5, which I think would be required. About the only thing you can do is roll back to 3 years or 4 years and see if you can borrow it in 1 year. But I don't know that we can capture more than 3 years.
So what % of the revenue are coming from the large user versus the small?
It's significant. I don't know if you have that in the budget.
Just a ballpark, I mean, 50 to 60%.
How much is the large
users versus the small residential?
Sure, where that is.
It's in here. Well, based on the rate block, 40,000 gallons per month is the first rate block, and anything more than that goes into the other categories. If we look at page 14 in your budget book, that has things broken down in pretty fine detail for the suburban water systems. And we see large industrial revenues at 2 million, other industrial customers at 5.5 million, and then residential revenues at 5.9. So well over half coming from commercial industrial.
Yeah, about 55%.
Hey, Lisa, this is Jeff. I guess the one thing I would point out though too is if we're making capital improvements that are going to last, facilities that are going to last 50 years, should we be making the current customers pay for that, or should we be borrowing and having people, in the future paying that off for a bond issue or something that lasts 20 or 30 years? So I think we always have to keep that part of it in mind as well.
I agree, Jeff. I think the difficulty is when we're now with the age of our system, we're now in the realm of doing those projects every year, with the big projects being main replacements, where if you replace 2% of your system every year, it's going to take you 50 years to do the whole system, and then you'll be starting all over again. So it really becomes an annual cost that the system has to bear. If we just compound borrowing on top of borrowing for those kinds of projects, it really costs a lot over time, a lot more over time. Dick, you had a question or a comment?
I just wondered how loud the brewery hollered, or if at all. Because we used to have to satisfy them before we could take the next step.
So Amir asked a good question at the last meeting about any contracts that we have. And for the water sales, we do not have any contracts related to rate control. We do on the wastewater side, but on the water side, we do not. And I received some feedback from industrial customers, but not a lot. We gave them a week's notice from, on this rate proposal, and have heard just a little bit, but not a lot. Nothing that would necessarily suggest that we're causing a major issue that they can't bear. Obviously, though, they would prefer the phased approach. I want to represent that to you.
I think option one is a less messier for us.
Is less messy?
Messier, yes. I mean, it's very clean. I mean, I do recognize the rate period and the other side, but the fact that we have to go borrow, and the rate might change and all of those, and the cash reserve, if you look at the long term, you got 4 something versus 1.1. So that's another $3 million saving for the ratepayer that,
Yeah, and I have no guarantees what interest rates are going to look like when inflation starts to stay at 5.5%.
Yes.
I mean, we got a break on the refinancing at 0.94%. I got to be honest with you, I don't expect to see that for a while.
Other board comments on the phase options 1 and 2. Option 1 is 22 or 24%.
24% revenue increase, of which 2% will be volume.
All right, so for what they would see is 22% increase, and then 5.5 for several years, and 0, resulting in $4.6 million in reserves at the end.
More project action reserves, yes.
Versus starting right in 2022 with a 7% for several years. But borrowing $12 million over those 4 years. I don't remember adding.
Close, probably, yes.
And only resulting in a reserve of $1.something million at the end of 10 years. So that's what we're dealing with.
Because you're going to spend more in debt service. That's what's going to eat up the difference.
Comments?
is your offer 24% and then 5.5%? Is that what you're,
I said those are two, that's the option one. Option one,
tell me option one again, 22%
22% charge increase.
on the fixed cost.
And only borrowing in 2023,
Correct.
$3 million something.
3
I don't have the charts in front of me. Three point something, and then 5.5% increase for 5 years, followed by 0% resulting in a reserve at the end of 10 years of keep going. 4.6 million hours. I can remember these things.
That option rather than the 7% plus whatever.
It's on the screen here now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I vote for option one.
I certainly go along and take on that.
Other comments, board members? I know you're out there.
I like option one also.
One of those.
This is Jeff. Liesl, just to follow up on your question. So we definitely need the water main replacement is the big ticket item. So the water mains are that old that every year or every 2 years, there's a substantial amount that needs to be done based on the age.
Yes, and so what we have included in the 2022 budget is actually only 1 mile per year, 1 mile, which is not even 2%. So we should be increasing that over time as the system gets older. Our average age right now is approaching the 50-year mark, which means we have some that's older, some that's not as old.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I guess I could be persuaded for option one then.
So future years beyond next year, I mean, that's included in the thoughts of how much money we need to have increased. We're not going to come back and say, well, we want to add another 2 miles in 2024, so we need more money. You'll have that covered as part of it.
Yes, that was all of that capital information for the next 5 years was taken right from the capital plan.
Yeah. Okay.
How do we do next year's budget?
Well, the reason why we did all this analysis is to answer the question, if you got a 24% increase this year, are we going to be seeing another one? And I think we can very confidently say, no, that is not going to happen.
We appreciate, because we asked that question last time. Appreciate you, your team doing this work and showing to us and to the ratepayer that, this is something that we have to do, but the benefit over long term is on the side of the ratepayer. So we appreciate that.
That all becomes part of the explanation that customers deserve, and hopefully they understand and agree with that. Okay, I think you have
Sounds like we have the direction.
towards option one. Pretty strong leaning.
Thank you. We will go ahead and move forward with finalizing the budget based on the option one rate structure that we reviewed. So anything else on suburban water rates? The rest of the budget review should go pretty quickly.
Right. Get into it.
All right, so suburban wastewater, Ed.
Okay, so essentially when we did the last presentation, we had just trued up some of the expenses in wastewater, but we did not true up the revenue. So we're showing the revenue increase, and this is pretty much the signatory increase and against some of the operating expenses that fall out as a result of that. And as you can see, the cash flow to this fund in terms of revenues just got better by $518,000. And essentially that falls right to the bottom line. We did not make any changes to capital spending. We're not making any other changes other than the operating cash days on hand went from 211 to 224. And essentially at the end of the budget term of 2022, we have $22.5 million versus 18.2, and that is a net cash flow of $4.4 million. And that is up by $518,000 to last viewing. I'll touch on just some of the key metrics since we've kind of already gone over the numbers. Like I said, nothing else really changed except revenue and some expenses. Operating ratio is now 1.10. Debt service coverage ratio is 10.82. Capital coverage is 2.52. That's pretty gaudy. And 434.53 in terms of total cash available on hand against expenses, and $6.4 million of unrestricted investment balances. So actually this fund ends up looking good with cash on hand and reserve levels. On the city, I believe the only change was on revenues. The revenues would reflect signatory revenues. So they went up by 191,000 rounded. Let's see, in operating expenses, we did have no change on that. Capital spending went up by 50,000 for some design engineering work on, and Chuck told me the project this morning and it's gone over my head.
Ed, that project, it's at Klein's Island. It's the main pump station improvements.
Thank you.
Sure.
Saluting me. So essentially the surplus goes up by $141,000. And at the end of the day, the fund ends up being at almost $70 million against 64.5 starting the year. So you get a nice cash flow on the city side of $5.4 million. Key metrics, 1.62 operating ratio, that's with D&A, debt service coverage ratio of 1.86, capital coverage of 1.19. That's good to see that over one, and restricted cash balances of 210.28. And again, no invested balances. So it's good to see the capital coverage ratio higher than one, because that's what we were shooting for. This is the dashboard for Suburban Water, just showing some of the operating expenses. 2022 at 15.3 is reflective of some of the rate increases that we've done in the last couple of years. And back in 2018, we were at 9.3. In 2021, we looked to be about 12.3 and then 15.3 for the budget. And that reflects the 24%. Operating income, starting at 2018, we kind of were positive, went a little bit more positive. It's good to see that operating income is positive all the way across all of the years, and going to be at 2.3 in 2022. Net income, again, a similar picture. We were positive in 2018, 19, 20, 21, with 21 going up and 22 going up as well at $2.1 million. Net cash available for capital. First year we were negative and we've swung around totally. Almost $8 million in 2019, 2.3 or 924 in 2020, then 2.3 and then 2.8 in the last 2 years. Debt service coverage ratio, we were at 1.37, climbed to 1.56. 2020 dropped back a little bit to 1.32. We think 2021, we were going to hit 1.69. And if you remember when we budgeted, we were just around 1.20. So the big help on this was the refinancing of debt on the Suburban Water side that we just did. And 2.01 on the budget. Capital spending, lowest we were at was in 2018 at 4.3, with a big chunk of spending in 2019. Kind of dropped off in 2020 to 5 million plus. Then in 2021, we're going to be at 3.6, and then 5.5 in 2021. Wastewater side, 2018, we're 14 million. We kind of stayed the same in 2019, went up some, 2020 to 16 million, and then climbed 4 million in 2021 to 20 million, and we're going to be a little bit up to that on operating revenue side in 2022 at 20.3 million. Operating income sort of all over the board here. We're negative in 2018, got even more negative in 19, stayed negative in 2020, and now we swung the boat a little bit in terms of operating income, and then we're 1.625 that we project in 2021, and a little bit less than $1 million in 2022. Net income, very similar, except in 2020, we were negative, and then hit $2.7 million in net income, then dropped a little bit in 2020, 1.4, and in 2022, we're at 1.8. In terms of net cash available for capital, $3.2 million was the lowest we were at. We hit almost $9 million in 2019, dropped a little bit to 7.4 in 19, 6.8 in 20, and back up to 7.2 in 2022. Debt service coverage ratio, we're down at 5.78 and 6.03 in the first 2 years of the block, then 11.95 in 20, 11.60 in 21, and 10.82 in 22. Capital spending, the highest year we had was 2019 at 10.7. Kind of next highest year was 2020 at 8.4. Then we kind of dropped back 3.7 and 2.9 again with a lot of the 537 plan stuff not to be determined yet. City division climbed from 35 million in 2018 to 46 million in 2022 with the rate increases of 7.1 and the additional phase-in. That's how we're getting a nice 11 point something % increase. So it's been a nice, actually the last 2 years have been good, what we were after when we did the amended agreement. So operating income started at 11.6. We've climbed upward every year, 13, 14.1, and 17.7, and $19.1 million in terms of operating income. 2018, 19, and 20, we were on the negative side in the city. And remember that there was quite a bit of, I'll call it non-cash interest that really affects them numbers and draws them negative. That changed a little bit when we did the refinancing. So we're at $1 million projected this year and $2.2 million of net income for next year. Cash available for capital. We're all the way down in like 2 million, 1 million, and 6 million, and then again aided by the agreement change. In 2021, we are going to be up at 5.2 and 11.3. And again, I'm repeating, but that's what we were after. We paid for that capital that was needed. Debt service coverage ratio. The lowest that we hit was 1.45 in 2020. We've kind of hovered around 1.6 something first 2 years, back up to 1.73 and 1.86. So that's all good. And capital spending in 2022 will be, I'll call it significantly higher than any of the years since 2018, where we started at 7.9. In 2020, we are going to hit 8.3, and in 2021, 11.3.
So that was a lot of information. The book is complete in terms of reflecting the numbers that Ed reviewed. We're going to, when we break from this discussion on the budget, we'll hear from Jennifer Montero about the Western Lehigh user charge report. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be continuing to work on communication with our industrial customers about the suburban water rate impact. The city of Allentown is currently reviewing the lease agreement rates, and they'll look through those that we provided to them this month. We'll publish the rates to our website this month. We will come back to you all in 2 weeks and ask for approval of the budget. If there are any changes in the next 2 weeks, you'll receive those as well as an executive summary to complete the packet. We just wanted to put it out there that we do have a deadline of November 1st to approve the budget. So if for some reason we're not where we need to be on the 25th, we have a few days to get it right, and we will work very hard to do that. And then we'll be back in front of the board in early November for the rate adoption request for 2022. We like to do that in early November so we have enough time to publish and work on implementation and all kinds of notices to make sure the public is aware of what's happening with rates. And then we'll come back in December with tapping fees. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Yes. Tapping fees will happen in December for 2022. Any final discussion, questions, or thoughts on the 2022 budget that we have presented?
What's the average residential rate going to be for the city users?
I don't have that. I'm sorry.
I saw it in here.
Well, I have the fixed charge, which will be for, oh, I'm sorry, $800 per year for water and sewer. That's what you're looking for. Yeah, that's what we have. Yeah, the actual rate schedule I don't have memorized, but we'll present that. It reflects about $800 per year.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, we're done with that. For the preliminary 2022 budget review, we're now moving on to the next topic, which is the Western Lehigh Interceptor user charge report. It's the yellow documents in our package, board package, and it's digitally board package page 67 to 99, and staff is looking for approval.
So Jennifer Montero is our contracts administrator. You get to see her at least once a year to review the Western Lehigh user rates, and she can explain the process and what to look at in the yellow packet. It's a lot of detail.
It is a lot of detail. Just gonna go through it very high level. So the rates that are contained in this report are for the municipal use of the Western Lehigh Interceptor and also the Little Lehigh Relief Interceptor 1 and 2. Okay, so it's not just the Western Lehigh Interceptor, and these rates are provide revenue that I think provides just about only over half, maybe 75% of that 20.3 million in the suburban wastewater fund. And that revenue basically accomplishes two main things. And the first and most important is the O&M cost coverage for the Western Lehigh Interceptor and the Little Lehigh Relief Interceptor Phase 1 and 2 budgets. And a large portion of the Western Lehigh budget is the city treatment and transportation charge. So that revenue covers that charge. And another thing that it does is it helps build reserve for future CAPEX. Ed went over that. Specifically this year, we built in reserves that are earmarked for the Trexler Town Interceptor solution for the Western Lehigh Interceptor Fund and the Park Pump Station Force Main. And that is specific to the Lehigh Relief Interceptor Phase 1 fund. The rates are communicated to our signatories. I gave them out probably over a week ago now. And what really is the most significant thing to them is that I accompany this report, this 35-page report, I think it is, with an actual estimated bill for them for the year. So they can look at that and compare it to the year before, and then take that total cost and roll that into their collection system budgets so that they can adequately charge their customers to cover not only their collection system costs, but also the costs that they owe us. And I haven't heard any feedback because really there's no surprises this year. It's become very routine, and there's no conceptual differences this year. There's no big surprises. And so I think they pretty much, I asked for feedback by Friday. I heard nothing from those suburban signatories. And so I'm just here to ask for preliminary approval of those rates, and they are increasing by 2%. And when I say that, what that means is it's a 2% increase to the average residential user in the suburban division. So it's based on residential use of something like 80,300 gallons and discharging at assumed strength, regular strength, not exceptional. And I was quickly doing the math here because I know you asked what the average bill is for water for residential, and the 2% increase basically means that they'll be charged about $142 for wastewater as opposed to last year $139. So that's it in a nutshell. Do you have any questions?
If you don't mind just clarifying that piece of it on the
Sure.
rates, we don't necessarily know what the municipalities will do with that increase.
All right.
It is up to the municipality to set their own rates for their customers, but if we flow the charges that Jen calculated through to a residential customer, it would be a 2% increase. The township may or may not pass that through depending on what their rates structure is like.
And when they receive the information that you provided them on this rate increase, you do an annual true up, and they have not received the annual true up yet. When does that true up come due?
That is being issued with the third quarter bills.
Okay. So they will have that information as part of their budget preparation.
I gave them the budget preparation. Actually, I gave them the draft final bill about a month ago. I think that was September's meeting. And no comment. I mean, they.
Pretty standard, about the same every year.
Well, it varies. The reconciliation varies depending on what our final costs and flows and loads are. They're fairly, unpredictable. I mean, we try to estimate those as best we can in budget. But, there's differences when you actually get the audited costs and the actual flows and loads, so.
So as far as process is concerned, we have this process by which Jen prepares this information to prepare the rates, which is shared with the signatories, but then also incorporated into the budget figures as well. And we asked for preliminary approval of the rates, which would then be incorporated into the budget. Already incorporated into the figures that you've seen. But it's a step to help the signatories understand that these are the rates that they will be charged as early in the year as we can. Yeah.
Okay, any board questions on what you have received? Discussion? All right, I'd like a motion. You need approval of this. A motion made by Amir to approve these proposed rates.
I second that.
Seconded by Scott. Any questions by anybody? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Proposal is accepted.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda is item number 6, monthly project updates. Information was received in our packet, white papers.
Yes, and we are, as you know, in the thick of budget season, so we don't have much on our minds besides budget. At our next meeting in October on the 25th, we will ask for approval of the budget, and we'll present any changes that we might have in the next 2 weeks, plus the executive summary. And that is, at this point, all we have scheduled for October. November, we're hoping to be able to present the 2020 audit. And now all of that is pending getting the final figures from Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement System.
It's a battle,
We've been through this before.
Yes.
just not this long.
So I had also asked the board for a little feedback on where we are with strategic plan. We try to finalize that and have some discussion either at the meeting on the 25th of October or the first meeting in November. We'll go into some more discussion about strategic plan. Where we are with that. That's all I have for the next couple of meetings, but happy to try to address any questions on the rest of the information items.
Any other questions? Thank you, Jennifer, for putting together the package for us. Thank you. All right, any staff comments?
Not today.
Solicitor comments?
No comments except for it's amazing how much work goes into the budget. It's very impressive, the work.
Yes.
By a lot of people.
Thank you. Any public comments on any items discussed today or anything else they want to bring forward before the board?
I have nothing, Brian.
Nothing so far, thanks.
Okay. Jennifer, there's not much left.
Sorry, yeah, all right, sorry.
Okay, at this time, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for everybody's attendance and all the work that went into it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Be safe.